There's only three things that we can train as humans. We can train our craft. We can train our body, our carriage, if you will, and we can train our mind. And if you're leaving one of those up to chance, like you're leaving like a really big opportunity on the table. And most people have not done the deep psychological work to be able to know what it even means to train your mind.
Dr. Michael, welcome back to the show. We're excited to have you.
I'm so stoked to be back with you. So thank you again for including me.
Oh, of course, of course. As a kickoff, pun intended there for the football reference, would you please orient us sort of around you, your work, how you show up in the world, and why people who are listening to the show today are going to care?
Let me start with a very grounded approach. Is by training, I am a sport and performance psychologist with a specialization, if there is such a thing. It's something more that I made up than has been donned or knighted, is a specialty in consequential environments. So environments where when people make mistakes, there are often physical, financial, deep emotional consequences that take place. And then, so I spent much of my time working in those environments of speed and accuracy where things got to be right. And there's an honest commitment to being one's best, to be honestly in service of teammates, because we need each other on the frontier. And that honest approach in those honest environments was the most pure way that I could come to understand how psychology shows up under stress and pressure. And so it's kind of moving way out into the extremes to be able to have a better understanding what most of us are trying to sort out in life is like, how do I do okay in life? And stress and pressure and that feeling of not being good enough, or that agitation that there's more to give and more to grow. Like, how do we work with that membrane? So that's where I spend most of my time, is on the frontier, working with the best in the world in consequential environments. And as a hobby, I get to just hang out with people like you and have great conversations, on podcasts about the things that keep me up at night. So that's a little context.
If people really knew that that's all of us who have longstanding shows like Finding Mastery, which is yours, and here on the Chase Jarvis Live Show, there's a whole bunch of self-service that goes on, right? We just get to fulfill these lovely things that we would be doing otherwise, and we just record them and share them with the world. So I give us a little, I want to excavate your, working with people on the frontier of high performance, and give us an example of some people that you work with, some additional companies, people, problems that you work on specifically, so that we can, continue to scratch away at this. What does it mean to be what you're doing, where you're doing it?
Okay, so the big picture right now is I've taken those best practices from the frontier, and I'm trying to figure out best practices that can be ported into enterprise companies and small and medium companies as well. So what are the best practices that can be inside the rhythm of one's business to help their people be their very best? And so that's what we do on the frontier, is like people are invested in being their very best, because when they make mistakes,
what kinds of people what kinds of people are we talking about when you say people?
So employees, managers, leaders, so folks inside of an organization, multinational organizations in particular, that have a bold ambition, and it can be a smaller company, but the idea is I'm going to go back to that word. There's an honest and earnest approach to do something big in the world. And most companies are trying to do something along those lines. Most are. And so here's like a grounding approach here, is that there's only three things that we can train as humans. We can train our craft. We can train our body, our carriage, if you will, and we can train our mind. And if you're leaving one of those up to chance, like you're leaving like a really big opportunity on the table. And most people have not done the deep psychological work to be able to know what it even means to train your mind. And that's where athletics has paid dividends, is that athletics and elite athleticism is about 10 to 15 years ahead of where business is. And 10 to 15 years ago, sports psychologists are walking the hallways, like making impact on the training of the mind. And so I'm just taking those best practices and seeing how we can crosswalk those over to business. And so that's kind of the way we're doing it now. And the big kind of opportunity is not to say to people, this is where we were 20 years ago in sport. Coaches and athletes would be like, oh yeah, mental part of the game. Oh yeah, that's important now. And then you say, okay, so what are we going to do? And they go, how about, yeah, how about imagery? But they do that after practice. They do that on their own time. They do that like, before they go to bed. There's no time. There's no extra time to try to squeeze things in later. So the opportunity that we figured out in sport is we need to figure out how to make it snackable, easy to lift, and to do it throughout the day, as opposed to a heavy lift right before you're going to fall asleep, or get up 30 minutes earlier to do some sort of mindset training. Like we're running at the end of our ability to add more to our plate. So what we're doing is taking good science and figuring out how to fold it into the day as opposed to something later and extra.
And when you say imagery, for example, you're talking about the practice of visualization, meditation, neutrality. These are some concepts that and I'd like to hear your words, because I'm putting words in your mouth right now, which is a total faux pas, but to try and orient our listeners, like these, when people think of the highest performers in the world, largely, as you have historically, we have talked about it in the context of athletics and just peak performance, like with artists, musicians, and now you're taking this into businesses, which is, I think, why it's especially relevant to our listeners. But you're talking about like seeing, goals as having happened, seeing your health and thriving in these. If you talked about those three buckets, if we're not doing one of those buckets, we're essentially 33% behind where we could be. And if we're not practicing with two of those buckets, your craft, most people, that's obvious, right? Because we were taught that as children to like, oh, if you want to be good at soccer, you got to kick the ball against the wall a bunch. But these other aspects of the game, and by extension, business and now life, those we're potentially missing out on that stuff if we're not training it with the same sort of approach. Is that a fair statement? And how would you add to that?
You've nailed it, and so here's where we landed is that I'll use 20 years ago just for some grounding, is that there was this idea that psychology was for the weak because the medical model studies dysfunction, and psychology sprung from the medical model. So we studied the dysfunctions, the disorders, the diseases of the mind, if you will. And it got a little bit of a bad rap, and we've tabooed, psychology in a way that that's for the weak. It's changing. It's been changing over the last kind of 15 years, and there's been some real advances in the last 5 years. Still not enough.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely not enough. When you go into those honest environments where people are fundamentally committed to understanding their potential, and I'll give you a very concrete example in a minute, that they are pulling for psychology. They are saying, I need more. I need to be more grounded, more clear. I need to figure out shit on the fly. So I need to be more creative when the stakes are really high. How can I be more present? How can I be more fluid? So they're pulling us into the room as opposed to like, what? We don't need that weakness. Get out. Like, it's not that. So, and that's where many kind of average environments might be right now. They're like, oh yeah, psychology is good for those people, but not like meaning the weaker people. But I don't need it. I'm good. I'm strong. That's going away the dodo. And people are going to get left behind because when you invest in what we have come to understand to be one of the most powerful machines, I'm butchering this beautiful neural networks of brains and this complicated idea of a mind. It's the most powerful system we have on the planet. And if you don't invest in that, like, it's going to run the show now. And the brain's dictum is to just keep you alive. That's it. It just stay alive. So it scans the world to find all the danger. It's picking up all the threat detection mechanisms. And that's not the good life. That's maybe a long life, but that's not the good life. It's certainly not a high performing life. And so I want to make this concrete example is there's a person that's in your backyard, Luke Akins. So Luke Akins gives me a call and he says, hey, Mike, now he's one of the best in the world in flying out of airplanes, okay, jumping off of high towers, base jumping and wingsuiting and parachuting. He's one of the best flat out in the world. So he calls, he says, Mike, I want to go up 30,000 feet. This is basically where airliners travel, and I want to jump. What do you think? I go, yeah, well, okay. Like you could do that in your sleep. And he says, yeah, but this one, I want to do without a parachute. I go, okay, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, I want to build a 16-story net that's about as big as a 4-car garage. And I think I can hit that thing. And to do that, though, I want to make sure my mind, my mental skills, like all of my internal faculty are rock solid. Want to go to work? I'm like, yeah, let's go to work. So those are the types of conditions and environments that I'm talking about where people have to be locked in to be their very best. Because if they make a mistake, like if you don't hit the net and you don't have a parachute on your back, and by the way, when you jump from 30,000 feet, or when next time you're up at 30,000 feet, imagine how big, just see, like find a house, and that's the target he has to hit. And if he misses that target, like, game over. So I want to bring those best practices into living rooms and meeting rooms and boardrooms. And there is a better way. There's a way to be more free, to have more energy, to have a deeper zest for life. And it's not expensive. It takes a little bit of time and a little bit of attention to knowing how to work with your own mind. And the way I think of psychology right now is the study of oneself. And like, if you want to be better at anything, you need to study it, right? And I mean, really study it. And so it's really an exciting time because we've got about 50 years of the science of the psychology of excellence. And that's what we're borrowing from.
If I'm going to translate this into the mind of the listener right now, my understanding of the work you're doing, and this is a great time to introduce your latest book, and congratulations, by the way, it's a masterwork of excellence. The first
Thank
rule
you.
of mastery: stop worrying about what people think of you. So imagine this 50-year, I guess, collection of data around excellence. Imagine what you've been doing with the highest performers in the world, across sport, business, artistry, just life. And if I'm going to sort of throw a dart at what you're saying is that there is a path for this now to be more widely available. The process of mindset awareness, studying your own psychology, is a massive lever in all of these areas: high performance, life, and business. Is that fair to say, first of all?
100%. And thank you for the compliment. And 100% accurate. Very clearly said.
Okay. So what is to me of specific and I think paramount interest to the listener who is on the show right now, this idea of worrying about what other people think of you. You are taking this from a quarterback who's playing in the Super Bowl, dropping back to pass. If he throws a bad pass, there are high consequences. But part of the consequences is, your team doesn't win, but in order to be in that state, there's a clarity, there's I would say a crystal vision of what's possible. And to get to that place, you have to be able to tune out the noise, specifically the noise of what other people think of you. And if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're an artist or a creator specifically, this idea of what other people think of your work, and by extension, potentially you, whether that's accurate or not, is a big deal. So if we can play through that, we are going to be our best, highest performing, and I will argue most fulfilled self. So when you started writing this book, who did you write it for, and why focus about specifically how other people's opinions matter unfortunately, to us, and how can we change that?
Oh, good. This is so fun because I I'll tell you how the origin story started is that I specifically remember when I was I was 16 years old. I just got my license and I saved up to buy a car. We humble means growing up, and it was a Mazda B2000 truck. Okay,
I had a Mazda B2000.
stop.
Of course
I
we
couldn't.
did.
That is great. I couldn't afford the Mazda B2200, the
Of course.
2200,
Of
but I had
course.
the Mazda B. So I was like, okay, like I saved up and I really, and I was very excited to drive this car. Now I'm driving down the street and I have this specific memory and it's stuck with me is that I was driving. I'm not a good driver yet. I'm 16. I just got my license. And as somebody was passing me on my left, and so they're going in the same direction as me, I remember thinking, I wonder what they're thinking about me.
Mm,
And and I was like, that is like terrible. Like what am I doing with myself? So I had this existential moment, like why am I not just driving? And why am I thinking about what they're thinking about me? So that was a little bit of a lightning bulb moment for me that's weird. And
mm,
I remember as I did that, I sat up a little straighter and I wanted to look cool. And I thought to myself, like, this isn't the authentic way. There's something else happening here. And I just kind of let it go, but it has stuck with me for, you know, 40 years. And so I thought, and it didn't go away. I, I suffered from this over tuning to what other people might be thinking or are thinking of me. And I thought I was alone in it. I thought I was the one that was feeling a bit more like a chameleon than everyone else and playing a social game to be okay in the eyes of others. And it was really born out of like me not knowing fully who I am. And of course, at 16, I don't have a clue who I am.
yeah.
But then when it started to become a bit more problematic is like when I was in my 30s and I was still playing that game. I knew myself better, but it wasn't like this conscious game I was playing. It was just, I just felt unsettled too often. And I was making choices for at least weighing in how are people going to think about this choice that I'm making. And it was just exhausting. I was tired of it. Then I started spending more time with um, best in the world. And they too were talking about that. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not alone in this. And so I wrote an article, let's call it 36 months ago on Harvard Business Review about ways to stop worrying about what other people think of you. And mastery is really about getting to the signal and gating out the noise. And the signal is always in the present moment. And it's not the present moment of focusing on what somebody else might be thinking. It's the present moment of the task at hand. And I wrote this article about it and how some very clear ways about how to work with that anxiety. And 12 months later, they called me and they said, hey, you had the number one downloaded article on Harvard Business Review. I was like, wow, okay. And they said, can we write a book about it? So, okay. So I said, now's not a great time. I'm wrestling alligators as an entrepreneur. I don't have the bandwidth. And they said, okay. Um, they reran it 12 months later, came back up and they called and they said, listen, it was the number one downloaded again. Can we please, figure out how you hit a nerve? Can we please? I said, oh, this is really cool. So I spent 2 years researching what is the science that underpins it and come to find out, I think it's the water we swim in. I think it's, you know, I think it's the air that we breathe. I think it's the thing that is so common that we've kind of missed it. And I just named it the fear of other people's opinions to be one of the great constrictors of human potential. And if you think about fear of other people's opinions, it's cleverly dubbed fopo.
Yep.
And I think about David Foster Wallace and the story that, and the two young fish swimming along, and there was an older fish that comes, is passing by them, and he nods at the young fish and he says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And then the two young fish, they swim on for a little bit, and eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" So the older fish's question in that moment, how's the water? it's meant to make the young fish think about their own reality and the things that are so ingrained in their existence that they fail to notice them. And I think some of life's most important realities are hidden in plain sight. And FOPO is one of those things, this undercurrent of, am I okay in the eyes of others? And until we square up with that, I think we get whipped around by the world around us. And I'm happy to talk about the biology and the neuroscience and the psychology and the interface of those. But until we square up that much of our resources and attention are given to what other people might be thinking of us, we'll never become what we're capable of. And there's real reasons we tune to it. There's biological safety involved in this. And so it feels relieving. It's relieving to get on the other side of it. And I want to be very clear. This is not about not thinking about what other people might be thinking, because that's important. This is not about not thinking about opinions of others, because some opinions are really important. This is about an excessive worry. This is about a clouded filter that infuses your decision making to be accepted, not rejected, more so than the authentic expression of what you've come to understand. And so I'm excited to talk about it, as you can tell. And
Yeah, well, this is,
yeah,
you know, obviously we've had you as a guest on the show before. I've been on Finding Mastery, your podcast, which is so well
so
done.
much fun. Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
It was so fun to have you on. Yeah.
so much fun. And when I saw this, I get a preview of this stuff from you and your team, and just
Mhm.
being tuned into this stuff. And when I see the title of this work, I immediately, like, my head fills with so many questions, and just is like, okay, great. This is a laser beam focused at our audience. And one of the first questions that popped into my head, this is months ago, prior to us even agreeing to make another show, was, I want to know what Dr. Michael says about this very complex thing, which is
Yeah.
most of the people's opinions early in life, especially, or when we are making these decisions. You talked about being a 16-year-old, when we're in this young adult phase, and or as an adult who has what we would track as an identity. They say, this is who I am, this is the job I am, this is who my family members are. We have these narratives about ourselves. It's when we're in these positions, forming as young adults, or we're locked into an identity. Locked is in air quotes there for people who are listening and not watching, that the problem, or a major problem, is we the people whose opinions of us are very impactful, they don't live in our heads. They are our parents, our career counselors, our peers, our brothers, sisters, and we care a lot about that, and sometimes too much, so much so that it doesn't have us live in that authentic expression of who we are, the kind of art we want to put out in the world, the kind of business that we want to make. Because perhaps, I always just give a dull but clear example, that our grandma doesn't think that being a YouTube creator is a great way to spend our life, or our parents don't believe that the business that we want to start can transform the world. And those can be impactful. And so when you talk about, there is a list of people who matter, and actually thinking about it is a worthwhile, if you can sort of compartmentalize it or frame it. So I want to hear from you. How do we manage this interesting intersection between caring enough about what our parents think of us and being our best self, and being free of other people's opinions, managing the fopo, as this, the term that you have
Mhm.
so adroitly coined. So how do we manage that? Because that has so many people specifically in this community, stuck.
Okay. So it's the right question, and let's frame it one more level, so make sure we're talking about the same thing. It is as much about the hypervigilant social readiness to not blow it, to be accepted. That's the more important part of FOPO. It's this preemptive, exhaustive attempt to try to interpret what they might think or might think of you later as a that's more important than the actual opinion of the person. I'll drive this home in a minute. So this does not rise to the level of clinical anxiety. This is a latent filtering process about influencing how you think, how you choose words, how you behave, so that you won't be rejected. Because rejection is such a powerful biological mechanism. If we were kicked out of the tribe long ago, it surely meant death. Because we'd have to hunt and forage and protect and gather, and we'd have to do all of that for maybe our spouse and a cousin and a few kids that we had. That meant death. That was like, we're going to get picked off quickly. So we want to be inside the pack for safety. But as a creator, an entrepreneur, somebody aspiring to be their very best, that means we're punching through on the fringe. So it is actually dangerous to be authentic to yourself. Belonging is safety. Danger is authenticity. But I think it's a fundamental decision that we have to square. What are we really doing in life? And when I ask most people, I say, what is your operating system designed for? And we'll get to the conversation. Yeah, survival. Say, okay, when you train your mind, what do you want your design to be about? To really go for it, to have the quote unquote good life? And of course, people raise their hand and they say, yeah, I want the good life. That's what I'm trying to do here. And I say, that takes risk now. And they go, oh yeah, I'm a risk taker. Yeah, I know. Like I'm good. And then I give them a moment to come on stage, let's call it. It could be a small room or big room, to see how their mind works under pressure. What do you think most people do?
Freeze.
Yeah. So they say they want to go for it in life. They say they want to take risks. They say they want to be great learners. They say they want they don't really, they're not encumbered by the opinions of others because they're the strong human. They're the go for it person. But then given the moment, their real operating system is the fear of people's opinions, because why else would you be afraid to go on stage? Why else would the fear of public speaking be one of the greatest fears of modern times? The audience does not have weapons. What they have is criticism and judgment and condemnation and critique, and like they have that as a weapon. So we're terrified of that. So how do we deal with this? Is first recognize, like, could you be affected by it? Like, could this be part of your life? And if you're already past that and you're like, hell yeah, like I'm exhausted by this. Like I know that there's more to give. I know there's more to grow. All right, great. First order of business. Be very clear about your first principles in life. Okay? Because your first principles, meaning the principles that you want to guide your thoughts, words, and actions. So you decide. You can borrow them from any philosophical tradition. You could borrow them from Buddhism, Christianity, Islam. You could borrow them from Nietzsche. You could borrow them from anywhere. John Locke. You could, whatever. Or you can just get a piece of paper out, or several pieces of paper, and see if you could whittle it down to a handful of first principles that you want to help guide your thoughts, words, and actions. Okay, let me be even more concrete. If Jesus happened to be in the room with us, what do you think his core first principle would be?
Love thy neighbor.
How about it? Okay, pretty cool. And then how do we know that? Well, there's a lot written about him. And I think we would say that he was about it. He thought about it a lot. He acted on it a lot. There was a consistency in how he showed up relative to that first principle. If Gandhi was here, we might say, this is about freedom. If Dr. King was in the room, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., if he was in the room, we'd say he was about equality. And so that first principle was so important that he lined up nearly all of his thoughts, words, and actions. Mother Teresa, be in service. I don't know where she came on. Amelia Earhart, go for it, explore. And, I can go on and on and on. Okay, that's just to ground the idea that first principles, when they're clear, can guide your thoughts, words, and actions, but you have to practice it. First, you need clarity of what your first principles are. And then if you can get that down to a sentence or two, something that you could hold in your consciousness. It's hard to hold a paragraph, but you could hold a couple words or maybe even a couple sentences. In the forefront of your decision making, you have a better chance of being the human you want to be. All right. That sentence or two, so you take all your first principles, you whittle that thing down to a personal philosophy, a one or two sentence axiom about what matters most to you. This is big work now. Okay. This is not like, easy lifts. But if we want to be our best, like we kind of got to do a little bit of this heavy work. And you could do this over a cocktail. It doesn't have to be like serious and intense. You could do this with friends. You could do it by yourself. But you want to make sure it's real to you. And one of those litmus tests is when you play it out loud. If before you're about to say it out loud, that you are just going to listen and feel how it sounds to say it out loud. Because the first time I did this work, and I had a mentor of mine challenge me to do this type of work, he knew that I was a lost little doe, and he's like, Mike, you need some grounding, work here. And I said my thing out loud. Instantly, I knew I had written that thing. I'd done all the deep work, but when I said it, it was for my dad's approval. And my dad, I love my dad, and he holds a big space in my heart. And he helped me be who I am. And I wanted to please him. I wanted his favor. I wanted this strong man to say, yeah, good job, kid. And it just bled into my adulthood. And I think that many of us can feel that if we have parents that cared and parents that were, had a big presence. So you want to just get into that space where it's like, when I say it, I want to chin check this. Is it authentic to me? And it can be a work in progress. It doesn't have to be a neck tattoo. You can play with it, like if that's fine too. And, so I think that's the first order of business. That's the big rock that get in the container. What are your first principles? Know those things, and then line up your days to be about them. And then you start to stack those. And as you stack those with a highly proficient craft and a carriage that doesn't get in your way, but actually might help you, unlock some stuff. Oof, I think we're on our way. And so from clarity to conviction is an interesting life arc. And sits in the middle between having that conviction that the greats have, whether it's Michael Jordan having the conviction, give me the rock at the end of the game, when he pushes off of Russell, that iconic moment in sport, the finals, snaps from the elbow, and the ball goes in, game over, celebrates, retires. To want that ball, to have that conviction is a very cool thing. To have that conviction of that, Magellan, I'm going to go see if the world is flat. He convinced a queen and a king to give hit the 5 biggest badass ships, which were a big deal at that time in 1500s, to go see if the world was actually flat or round. And if it is round and I come back, y'all going to be rich. Okay. So he did that work. He had such clarity about the mission he wanted to go on. And he had such conviction. He died for it. He didn't make it back, by the way. So not all these stories are the happy ending that we would hope.
And he died.
And he died. But from clarity to conviction, what sits in the middle of those two pillars are mental skills. The mental skills required to be fully present when the heat gets turned up, when stress is on board, when there's some sort of pressure in the environment. We don't need better technical skills, because that's not going to carry us. Because what happens to technical skills, when our mind constricts and our body tightens up, we lose access to those beautifully proficient skills that we were able to do in the safety of our living room or the practice field when there's no consequence. So what we need is to keep the aperture open from a psychological, emotional standpoint, and to keep that aperture open so we can access our creative, our critical thinking, our attuning, whatever our skill is. Like, to keep that aperture open, we need to train mental skills. And those are not hard. There's 5 basic mental skills, and you could weave them in just like you practice, sets and reps in a gym, you can do sets and reps mentally as well.
Okay. 3 important things in reverse order. What you just said, these 5 things that you can weave in. Prior to that was the um, allowing. It's almost an allowing the mind, once you've trained it, allowing it to drive rather than thinking of these skills that, oh wait, your craft. Like if you're in golf, how am I going to put my hands on the top of my backswing? Or if you're an entrepreneur and you're giving a talk, how do I not freeze? There's the sort of the readiness about that, and then going all the way back to the top are these first principles. So those are the 3 pins that I put in what you just said, and I want to cover them.
Okay,
Let's
cool.
go in reverse order. So what are some of these skills that you feel like are practicable? And we don't have to go into detail on all of them because there's a lot of ground to cover. But what are these skills? And we can again get the book and go deep on these things, but share a little bit about what are these skills that we can practice.
I'll answer all those. Did you just do that from memory? Meaning, like,
Yes.
are you a good listener and you're able to like hold ideas
Yes,
in
I have
your
no notes. I have
working
no
memory?
notes in front of me. Yes.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a skill. That's a real
Oh.
skill. And you've tuned that. And I would say that listening deeply and to work with something as you're listening, working memory and great listening is a part of mastery. And so
Mm.
so uh, that was fun just for me to see you go, oh, A, B, and C, and even in reverse order maybe made it easier for you. But that was so. Thank you. It's a hint at why you're so good at what you're good at as well. Okay, so back to the question at hand. Mental imagery, we'll just use that one for a moment, also known as visualization. I don't use the word visualization because imagery is an absorbed experience. It's not just visual.
Mm.
And so when you go into, okay, I'll use a story to share the science on imagery is quite ridiculous. Like it's amazing. Like it increases confidence. It helps with myelinization of your nervous system so that you're more familiar. Your nerves are more grooved and familiar with patterns that of excellence. Like I said, it helps with confidence. It helps with like problem solving. Like and it's really a powerful tool, and it's not well used by many of us in a disciplined way.
Mm.
We are using our imagination a lot, all the time. When we're trying to imagine what might somebody be thinking of me, that's part of imagination. But to use it in a disciplined way for your growth, to be a better person or to be a better teammate, I'll get to that in a minute, is a skill that we can work on. And so imagery is when I'll just say you close your eyes and you become absorbed in what the greatest street fighter of all time, Rickson Gracie, shared with me. Rickson Gracie is a legend he started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, I should say. And he's an absolute legend. 1,000 street fights, never lost, that type of person. So he and I are sitting down to talk about like how he uses his mind because he is obviously technically proficient, but he's able to access all of that technique in a fist fight, And so I'm asking how he does it, and he goes, "Oh, imagery." And he's got this kind of broken Portuguese Brazilian accent, and he says imagery, and he lights up, and he says, "It's the most beautiful movie I could ever make." And I am at the center of the movie. I am the star, and I see what I want to experience later in the most beautiful way. And when I close my eyes, I create that movie. And I said, "How often do you do it?" He said, "Oh, every day." So I share that story, and then I share another. It was an athlete who was the fastest man on the planet. And he goes, "Mike, I got a problem now." I said, "What's that?" And he says, "You know how we talked about doing imagery? Well, I found that doing it in the shower is like a place that I can really get into it. But my wife thinks I have a masturbation problem. So
My
she
God.
keeps running in and checking to see, like, what am I doing in these long showers?" So I say that because, like, he's showering all the time, and so I love your laugh, dude.
It's
And so,
hilarious.
so, I'm not suggesting imagery just the night before a thing, but like this consistent, uncommon, this, this relentless pursuit to feel and see how you want to upgrade or how you'd like to be in certain environments later. And Felix Baumgartner, who I feel like I'm trying to drive the point home by using stories.
You're nailing it. Felix Baumgartner was the guy who Red Bull jumped out of the capsule, way high in the air. Yes, that was
So yeah,
legendary. Yeah.
so he went up 130,000, 128,000 feet to be exact. No one has ever been that high um, in an attempt to jump to break this speed barrier. So he was going to be transonic. His body was going to be transonic. And the brightest minds in aerospace said, listen, we don't know what's going to happen. Your arm might be doing one speed and your chest and head doing another speed. We don't know if it's going to rip off or not. And so there's consequential, of course, in that environment. And if he went into a flat spin, so if he jumps from 128,000 feet and he's off by just a little bit and he starts to rotate where his head and his feet are kind of in this circular flat spin, all the blood would rush to his head and his feet and he could land. He's going to land no matter what, but land as a potential, vegetable where like his brain had so much blood volume or lack of blood that it's no longer able to function. So that was a real risk in that moment. So he wanted to make sure when he jumped, he was completely square on a imperfect, unstable, moving platform that was only half the size of his foot. As he opened up the capsule door to look out to, Earth 130,000 feet, getting his feet on something that's only about like, a handful of inches. It's an amazing thing that he did. But he used his mind to be able to see that moment hundreds, if not thousands of times before he actually got there, because he had to get it right. So when we go to a board meeting or we're going to a living room to have an intimate conversation, we don't have to have it right. We'll likely get a second pass, or if we get kicked out of the boardroom, or if we don't have that, if we run out of money from an entrepreneur perspective, it doesn't mean that we're going to die. We're going to get a second chance to sort something out. So it becomes less critical. So we spend less purposeful time training our capabilities. That's why I love the honest environments, because they must be true and honest. They make a deep commitment to their capabilities, where the rest of us, I don't live in consequential environments. My body responds like it's consequential because this ancient brain trying to sort out modern dilemmas, the ancient brain knows consequence and how to respond: fight, flight, freeze, sometimes submit. But it hasn't sorted out like Instagram. It hasn't sorted out like a stadium and public speaking. It operates like that's a saber tooth. That's a warring tribe coming your way. You better arm up now, or you better run fast. And we don't do either of those on a pitch deck or, some sort of intense conversation. We just feel all of that and fake it. We feel our heart, we feel our lungs, we feel our breathing, we feel the cotton mouth, and we just pretend like we're okay. That's bullshit. That's an exhausting way to go through life, because I lived it for far too long. It's bullshit for me. I don't know if it is for anyone else, but like that fake it till you make it, it's fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
You don't fake anything now. I don't fake anything. So if you do the right thoughtful work of mental imagery we're talking about here, if you do that thoughtful work ahead of time, you have tools to navigate, to adjust, to change your focus, to change your arousal levels, to be more eloquent in the present moment. That is possible, but we weren't taught it in grade school. So let me just get right down the mechanics. Mental imagery. If you can start with 1 minute a day, cool. Somewhere like 12 to 20 is probably more ideal. And it's not, you don't have to do it every day for the rest of your life, but I would start now and practice playing a movie in your mind with all of the senses. You can smell it, hear it, taste it, and feel it. And you can watch it from a drone perspective, an audience perspective. You could watch it from inside your own body. And you want to feel what it's like to be you in a particular circumstance that hasn't happened yet. That's it. That's all it is. So pick something that's important to you, and then see and feel yourself walking into that environment or riding into that, whatever it is. and being your very best. And I would pick an 85-15 perspective. 85% of your time when you play this movie, be a badass, be great at it, see it and feel it, slow it down from all different directions, and really like it's the idea of excellence in your own mind. And asterisk excellence. Excellence to me means being at home with yourself wherever you are. It's not the shiny metallic feel of like I'm on the top of the podium. It's this feeling of being at home with myself everywhere, anywhere. Okay, then that 15% of the time, see yourself in a compromised position. See yourself maybe sweating on stage. See yourself like Michael Phelps did. His coach was on Finding Mastery, and Michael Phelps did a lot of imagery, one of the greatest ever athletes, period. And he was spending time in his mind seeing his suit rip off and finishing strong, seeing his goggles flip over with water rushing in and finishing strong. Sure enough, as we know, you can kind of check the records on one of his gold medal attempts when he actually won gold. Handful of strokes before he touches, his goggles flip over, and he's consumed with water, and he doesn't break stride. And now, for some of us that go, oh, you shouldn't have thought that, because if you see it, it'll happen. Have you read The Secret? You got to read The Secret. I got to wave my arms now, Chase. I got to wave my arms. You might like The Secret. We can still be friends, but but that's not how this works. My best understanding of good science, that's not how this works. I'm happy to be wrong. And that would be really cool if I was wrong, because I can see a lot of things in my mind, but I don't think that that's how it works. And so it is a mechanism, a free mechanism to see and sort out alternatives and ways of being in the future that makes us relatively unique. And we don't use it in a disciplined way. Massive opportunity for people. That's one.
Man.
You know what another one is?
What's that?
Chase, breathing. Good old breathing practice. And I know you've squared up on this, lots. And that's a mental skill. So the principle is called arousal regulation. And when I say that to my 15-year-old son, he looks at me and goes, Dad, what are we talking about?
Is it one of those times in that conversation, Dad?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So arousal regulation just means when your body activates, and it activates for lots of reasons, but basically you've interpreted something to be really important. And when it switches on, we have abilities to be able to work with that intensity. Breathing is one of those great capabilities. And so, but if you're only going to do breathing training, the moments before the intense thing, it's like doing free throw shooting for the first time ever before the NBA finals. Like, no, they've been practicing for years. That's how this works, right? And so we want to put in a breathing practice on a regular basis. And if you wanted to link imagery and breathing, that's a nice little entryway. If you do some breathing training right before you do some mental imagery, and if you said, listen, I've only got 15 minutes, maybe do 7 minutes of breathing and 7 minutes of imagery, or maybe do 14 minutes of breathing and 2 minutes of imagery. I think you've got more than 15 minutes, but Instagram tugs on our attention. So those are two. Self-talk is another one. We can be great at self-talk. You can practice it.
Yep.
Goal setting, pre-performance routines, so those are a handful of the mental skills that we can practice.
Incredible. Now, I promised we were going to trot back through these other sort of, is a very ambitious conversation we're trying to have here for our listeners. And in the middle of all that, what occurred to me is just giving us these 5 is so valuable. I want to ask a couple of specific questions. I also was introduced to mental imagery. I'll just say in the 80s as a young kid, I was identified as an athlete that had potential, was introduced to some sports psychologists, was given some white papers and some books, and the ability through the Olympic development program and soccer to have exposure to this. And it was transformative. I got very, very excited about it. And one of the things, what I love the distinction between not mental visualization, but actually imagery, because what I found to be one of the most powerful things for me in that moment was the smells. I would be like the smell of the grass on Friday night as you're, slide tackling and running around. Like It was so visceral for me, and that was, it happened to be like this linchpin in having this be very visceral and very real for me. And the ability to have my imagery be very real and submersive was, I think, the word that you used. I could, then it was more powerful even than a movie. Because in a movie, you're watching a movie, right? And even you
That's
might be
it. That's
hearing
it.
sounds, but I was just, and I became consumed with visualization, and it went on to be very valuable for me. And as an entrepreneur, I affected many of those things. Having my last company acquired, that was a story that I had been telling myself, and I'd lived those moments very regularly. So thank you. That is in itself a very powerful gift for me to receive from you in our show here, because it completes the puzzle for me. Like, oh, that's why imagery instead of visualization. Um, because I want, there's so much ground that I want to cover. I promised to trot back over those sort of three different attributes.
Mhm.
If you were to try and give our listeners a highlight reel, was there anything else you wanted to say on those other items? Because there's a whole nother aspect of our conversation I want to make sure to get to, but I want to give you the opportunity to fill
No,
that promise that.
yeah, like I think we've covered good territory. Like
Okay.
there's, and I love that you just brought up highlight reel because
Mm,
that's what we talk about in sport often. Like instead of mental imagery, we might say, "Hey, how you doing on your highlight reels?" And
mm.
it's the movie that you're playing. So that's another way to think about it. But no, 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 let's move forward.
Okay.
Like I'm
Th-
cool with it.
this so the next bit is very specific to your latest book, which, again, folks, if you're listening now and you can't write this down for some reason because you're driving or whatever, you can't just make sure to pick this book up. As someone who's been professing how these tools have impacted my life and across so many guests on the show, I think what Dr. Michael's got here um, is the perhaps the most focused piece of work that crossed 1,000 episodes of the show that we've had on how to actually put this into practice. And this is stop worrying about what people think of you. So that's the book. And to underscore that subhead, right? Stop worrying about what people think of you. I want to know, what is the most misunderstood or understood aspect of that for people who are showing up new to this topic. I think we're all walking around, as you said, this is a subtext that plays in so many people's life, and if you distill it, it's like it's there for pretty much everybody. You said it early on in your introduction that even the highest performers in the world had this, and that's part of what made you interested in it. Where fundamentally do we get this wrong? What are some of the most basics that we can attune our attention, and what are some actions that we can start to take to stop worrying about what people think of us?
Well, let's wrestle with that last bit, like, and get to some actions here because the signal to noise ratio is kind of what this is about. And when you're attending to the noise or distractions, um, it's hard to manage the required proficiency to be artistic or to demonstrate or feel mastery or to get an unlock of something that you're trying to solve if you're attuning to a distraction or noise. So this is really about training your mind to be in the present moment more often, because that's the present moment is where high performance happens. It's where artistry is expressed. It's where all things that are beautiful and amazing are experienced, and where pain and suffering is also experienced. So the true life happens in the present moment, and we increase the frequency of our time being there, we're better off as
Mhm.
a species and as a person. So when we're using our mental models to be able to try to extrapolate what somebody else is thinking of us, there are times that that's important, but that is to be accepted, and that there are times when that's important too. So that's where this kind of tension is. So this is not. So I'm not suggesting don't care, because that's like sociopathology. It's narcissism. Like that. Let me use another example is that. And when I talk to athletes about trying to understand their ideal competitive mindset, they often have two variables that are competing with each other, but there's a unique cross nexus. There's an intersection between those two that is like the vibe for them. Right? For example, it's like they want to be calm and intense. So like have a fire, but still be smooth and calm. Like that's hard to square. And it takes time and practice to turn on, to know how to turn on that state. Same here is it takes time and practice to recognize when an opinion is important and when an opinion is you're excessively worrying about the opinion. One way to do that, here's the skill. So we talked about um, your first principles and personal philosophy. Now I want to introduce a second, which is this idea of a performance-based identity. So again, that goes back to, Mr. Wallace talking about the water that we're swimming in and not quite recognizing it. Many of us, me included for a long time, have a performance-based identity. So when I was young, and I think you might recognize this, Chase, if you're young and talented, athletic in this case, that people talked about the 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 output part of us. They talked about the crosstown rival. They talked about like last week's game, and they talked about the goals and hopes that you had relative to this part of your life, more so than just about anything else. When that happens, and between the ages of 12 and 18 to 22, we're trying to figure out our identity. That's kind of our job at that phase. And if the outside world is like talking to us a lot about one narrow part of us, and we're loving that we're getting that attention because it feels great, and we love how it feels to be good at something, we start to foreclose our identity to a very narrow way, and that narrow way is based on performance. For you, maybe performance as an athlete. So performance-based identity is defining who we are by how we do what we do in relationship to others. That's the big rub there. So I'm okay if I'm just a little bit better than you. If I got a 65 on a test, but everyone else got 64 and below, I'm okay. So a performance-based identity is kind of at the crux of this thing. And it's a method for having a contingent self-worth. My self-worth is depending on my performance, and it's depending on how people view me. There's a looming fear of failure, because if I blow it, I've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I've thrown my whole self-esteem and self-worth out, and that's actually not really possible. And there's this perfectionist, this drive, this obsessive need to be just great, to be good, to have the highest standard amongst anybody else. Then I'm okay. So performance-based identity has problems. It will get you really good, though. Again, this misunderstanding. A performance-based identity will get you really good. So will obsessive compulsive disorder. So will obsessiveness. So will narcissism. So will a lot of different things. It will not get you. So the treadmill for high performance is a different treadmill than the treadmill for mastery. So it will get you really good, but it won't break you free. And what got you there isn't likely going to be what will get you, to the next sense of freedom or artistry or mastery or whatever we're looking for, joy, happiness, fulfillment. It's a different treadmill. And we put so many of our kids on the treadmill of high performance. Shit, man, what are we doing? And so performance-based identity is fundamentally different than a purpose-based identity. And a purpose-based identity is that I am in pursuit of something far bigger than me. And I'm in pursuit in trying to make a difference in my life adventure. And it's not about how well I perform, especially how well I perform to others, because that performance-based identity is how you view yourself relative to how you are in others' comparison. So of course their opinion and the stack ranking is going to be a primary driver. So that's one of the ways to break free, is to kind of push your seat back from the table and be like, whoa. Is my identity wrapped in like how good I am? If it is, take a look at that. That got you good now. Your audience is really talented, I would imagine. Like you're switched on. I'm sure they vibe with that. And I don't want to be like the thorn in the side or the fly in the champagne, but you know what? Sometimes the fly in the champagne is a little spicy. It's cool. And Like, I'm saying drink that champagne now. Like, is there a way to have more purpose, clarity of purpose in your life? So first principles, that's one way to go. A second way, and these are not orthogonal, you can do both, is square up with a purpose versus performance-based identity.
Huge whiffs. You just sort of like trotted out so many people's past who are listening to the show right now who, like myself, were rewarded, found, beauty and meaning and utility and excellence. And that makes for a different journey later in life when you have to start to understand and excavate some of that stuff. And that is what the journey inward has been so powerful, so personal for me. What my wife is a meditation and mindfulness teacher. She teaches those skills. All that came into my life, I would say far too late, but maybe just at the nick of time. And understanding where people miss. I think there's a lot of people right now who are taking notes saying, okay, you got my attention. The book is so articulate about this. Again, I say the title of the first rule of mastery: stop worrying about what people think of you. Is there a sort of a wrapper that you would care to put on this conversation to help those people who, I think the idea of sport and performance and being an amazing person is seductive, but truly there's nothing more seductive than being the best version of yourself. So if through that, right. Yeah. So through that lens, is there a wrapper that you'd care to put on this conversation and the idea of, if people want to be their best, then fill in the blank, aside from referring them to the book, that's the ultimate. That's, again, when I had a chance to see this early on and I feel grateful for it. But for those people who are still don't have the book in front of them, put a wrapper on being the best version of themselves.
So when I thought you were talking about rapper earlier, I was thinking Eminem, Dr. Dre. What's the rapper that we're? Okay, good. So the rapper. Okay, so the rapper, the bow tie here.
Yeah.
So let's be really clear. The first rule of mastery is to work from the inside out. Is to go inward and to figure out your blind spots, to figure out your tripwires, to understand how you operate, so that you can be just a bit more graceful in how you adjust to unforeseen conditions of the world. The first rule of mastery is to work from the inside out so that you can adjust more eloquently. And that is the beautiful science of psychology. So I'd say 3 ways to start that process. Get with somebody of wisdom and have conversations with them. That could be a psychologist. It could be somebody across the street from you. But dedicate time with somebody who has wisdom. The second is mindfulness, to you and your wife's best practice. That is a badass way to get going on this. And the third is journaling. Now, if you're doing some combination of those 3, I think you're on the path of mastery to work from the inside out. I would just keep it super simple. Those are completely available. And I love having this conversation with you, and there's so much more I would want to share our best practices. But I think we're at a pretty good place to say, start there and make a real commitment to work from the inside out. The freedom on the other side is as good as you can imagine.
Yeah, it turns out that Socrates was pretty smart when he said, "Know thyself." That is this inward journey, and as someone who has been on this journey for a long time, especially through the perspective of how you saw yourself a performance-based identity. It's been a long and winding journey, but so worthwhile. And look, I don't want to talk about it like I've arrived, because this is this is a work in progress, right? And I do love how you approach that. You've the humility that you approach these topics with, your own vulnerability and sharing your life experience, not just with with driving, but your relationship with your father. This is all really meaningful for us as listeners and watchers and supporters of you and your work. So I'm grateful for the time that you are willing to share with us and our community here. From Dr. Michael and myself, thank you so much for spending your time with us, listening, watching, however you're consuming the show. And until next time, we both bid you an awesome day.